we will be now wrapping up a tale that we were told off the back of our game. The story of this particular adventure was Jonathan Mark Hicks created a game called Tales of the Infinite, and it was very much a playtest that we were able to. He was really keen to let us have this game and let us take this game, and one thing led to another. And as busy as a man as he is, and I approached and said, is it all right if we take this game and if we run with it? And he's like, yeah, go for it. And he had written it for us, so it was like, go for this game, take it where you will. So we did a microscope session, and the microscope session was bookended by two big events, and then we kind of filled in the gaps in between that. And the microscopes gave us a little bit of a steer as to the kind of events that befell the mighty Infinite, the Infinite, who all-seeing, all-knowing, who have powers of mind reading and far-seeing, and were able to run this vast, huge, galactic empire through coercion, violence, subterfuge, technical slavery, anything, you name it, anything to keep this. And the one defining factor of this was that every planet under the control and dominion of the Infinite have to give of themselves. They have to give a tithe collected on an annual basis and from space. For those planets that were wealthy enough, they would be responsible for getting the tithe up into space. For those that were not, they would be landed upon by the Infinite and their shock troops. The Sunburners would be the ones to make sure there was no trouble in the masses, and that the transactions that were required were made with haste, efficiency, and no violence. And so that is where we left our adventure last time, was the tithe. And this was the ending of the campaign, because we didn't really know how it was going to end, and we didn't know where it was going to end. But the ending of the campaign was that the players were all on the tithe ship, having variously been cajoled into getting into up there around their planet, and had been told by a nebulous voice that the tithe was insufficient. It was not enough. And that was the end of the campaign. So yeah, that was a wee bit of a warm walkthrough, quick of where we were. And I don't know about you guys, but it was a fairly bleak ending that we arrived at. It didn't really seem to be a very promising and hope-filled ending. It did seem to have its roots firmly in the darker side of storytelling. So I guess the epilogue today is maybe about offering some alternatives, or how it might wrap up, or how it might progress into that. I think multiple endings are possible. You never know. None of them will be any more right than the others, but it's just interesting to see where everybody thinks it might have gone, what their characters might have done to influence it, or how it might have turned through the aeons. How it might have slowly rippled out and made a change of events later on. I don't know. It's all sorts of possibilities, isn't there? It was dark. It was dark, though. Everybody's agreed on that, right? That was a dark ending.
Yeah, although, I mean, to be fair, I think when we did the microscope session, I think we decided that this part was in one of the, because you had the dark and your light periods, didn't you? In throughout the microscope campaign, you have to build these things into the timeline, and I think we decided that we were kind of in a dark period at this kind of mention that they start giving people away as part of the time, and that the low point. So I kind of figured it was going to be a bit bleak. Whereas I think Lloyd, I think you were thinking it was going to be the start of the rebellion, which would make it a little bit.
So a tipping point, yeah.
Yeah, the lighter side, and so I think we'd probably maybe we were working at cross purposes a little bit at that point.
That's all right.
Because I was expecting it to be, I was expecting the bad ending, and I was working towards the bad ending.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah,
I can
and
see why she left you.
yeah, well, you know,
Well, to me, it seemed more like it was almost a history of prior to other characters starting the adventure.
Yeah.
It felt very much like we were playing the part that is those first 3 or 4 paragraphs of a new adventure describing what's going to happen in this adventure based on the history. And so for me, it was interesting to be able to play those 3 or 4 paragraphs that then lead on to other heroes coming and taking up the call. And, you know, always when you're listening to the history, your character's always thinking, well, what if somebody changed and did this instead? Or why didn't they do this? Or why didn't they do that? So to be able to, from a player's point of view, experience that history of it was quite unique, and it was quite challenging, and it doesn't allow for the well, why did these characters change? Well, you got to put yourselves in the historical character's position, which is what I really felt we did.
Why did they lock a man in the basement of the spaceship?
Poor Clifford.
Leave him there. Who knows?
Yeah, we should explain that little part of the story was that I had come up with a rather lethargic and slightly dour cargo handler at one of the research centres that the players were investigating, and they decided that it would be a great idea if he would be taken out of the equation so that they would have
he needed some
an easier
time off. He was
easier
tired.
time of it. He'd been kept up on narcotics for about 4 or 5 days, and therefore when he sat down, he immediately fell asleep. And then they dropped him in one of the Lloyd's characters' ships. Discreet cargo holds, and left him there, and I think that's pretty much where he still is. Right?
I mean, to be fair, it isn't our fault. We were like assigned to a new ship without getting a chance to go back and unpack. But like,
Yeah. I mean, we never said that we'd locked him in, did we? Did we lock him in? I can't remember.
Well,
I think there is a button there to like open it. Whether he finds
It's
it
not on the inside.
before it turns before it, well just
Before
in
his air
case.
runs out.
Yeah,
when we went off,
but
of
like whether he
the
finds it in
cargo,
time is the other thing.
it just kind of, he was just there when we, left for the first time with it, and since we forgot him there, we just kind of continued to forget him there because it was the thing to do.
But we just couldn't get back to let him out.
Yeah.
What did they do? They're probably going to scuttle the ship after the end of the adventure. He'll just be like, "Why is it suddenly getting very hot? Why is everything shaking?" And then it'll just go into darkness.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a rather unfortunate treatment of the NPC. The other NPC that I was interested about was the lady who handed Dr. Zimmerman the key card, who kind of spilled a little bit of the beans and led that out because she walked out of her job. But
That's the thing.
Yeah,
Because I think we even said, are you going to be allowed to just walk away? And she just said, "I'll think of something," or something along those lines. And
we could have given her the keys.
yeah,
You could have saved Pippi.
here's a ship. Fly it into it.
at that point, we probably weren't sure if we were coming back or not. We probably
Here's
were.
the keys to a ship and a disgruntled manservant.
Yeah.
So I had visions of her, and I didn't want to overplay it because I think it would have been a bit much, but I had visions of her because it was a big plaza, this huge area with open space, like a lot of open space, a big lot, and then there's already been security systems on the roof of this building with laser pointers, heat tracers and all the rest of it. So I had this image of a cutaway scene where the command on the roof is saying, "We've got somebody walking out," and then somebody over the radio saying, "Take them out," sort of thing. And just like boom, and that's it, and then just the body crumpling. So I don't know if that necessarily has to happen, but that's kind of what I was thinking. But I couldn't see a way.
I couldn't see any other way that she would get away from what was going on, because obviously they wouldn't just let somebody just oh yeah, sure, you know all about the entire massive conspiracy.
Yeah.
Off
So
you go.
the entire planet is a bit of a maze.
I mean, it is. But I kind of figure it would be, they could make it difficult for somebody to leave, right? With all this stuff that they got going. So I just assumed that she wouldn't make it.
Well, she probably wouldn't just walk out the front, just out the front
With
door.
the Infinite reading minds and knowing what's going to happen and stoking rebellion, there certainly isn't a lot of question as to what would happen to, an NPC player that is playing that role at that time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I said that side of it, in terms of stoking the rebellion, it's a difficult one, because if this is how they've managed to succeed, the Infinite have managed to succeed for such a long period of time. They've always managed to know where it's going to happen and what they need to sit on, their buttons they need to press in order to quell any uprising.
Yeah.
So in order for that not to be the case, and for something has to dilute their power or obscure themselves from it somehow.
Yeah, but also have the thing of like what's literally true and what do the people in the universe believe to be true.
Yeah,
that's also.
I think it's rumored, wasn't it? We say it's rumored that they can read minds.
So people live in fear. They expect to be found out.
Yeah, and if they could see into the future, then they would have known what was going to happen right there.
Yeah, we would never have been able to get as far as we did.
Yeah, so either there's another story that was going on in the background, which is a possibility, that was preventing them from being able to see that, or it is just a rumor, bullshit, something that.
Or there was a reason why you guys were all put onto that ship and allowed to get that far, seemingly of your own will.
Yeah.
But maybe not. Maybe you were manipulated by this higher power to get on there for something, and then we don't know what that something is because we didn't get that far.
Yeah. Which would kind of make sense, some of the lame excuses that we were coming up with for being in certain places.
You rolled very well, though. Your rolls were great throughout the campaign. You didn't fluff that many.
No. I could see an adventure created about a group of people that are working on a project that winds up being how do you keep the Infinite from reading minds, maybe through the use of like streptozine or something like that, and going that way, that you have some sort of consumable resource that's limited that allows you to do certain things out of the sight of the Infinite at some point, and then be able to move on from there. Similar to how you have food and rations for people to eat and need to consume them. But there was a tipping point, and I couldn't figure out where it was going to go from there after Dr. Zimmerman makes his loud and proud and public and with full disclosure proclamation. And from that point, I was like, oh my God, where's the story going from here? We are just in for it now. And how that kind of worked into the story, I'm still struggling to see. That just brings it off into an entirely different vector.
Yeah. I think the idea behind that, when I kind of made that decision, was A, I was probably panicking. And B, it seems to me that there has to be, in order for the rebellion to start, there has to be, like, say that, a turning point. And I figured that if nobody knew what was going on, then the whole adventure that we just kind of were playing was kind of pointless. So that so we had to drop something. I felt that personally, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I kind of felt that we had to do something which would get the message out there about what was going on. To warn
the people. Sort of suggesting it because you kind of need it to spread to start anything.
Yeah.
Okay, but my big fear was, number one, the Dr. Zimmerman character was so well developed, and so finely crafted, that the other thing that a rebellion needs is a martyr. And what better way to put yourself out there as the martyr than to publicly go on, on media and say, this is who I am and this is what's happening, and boom, that's when the martyrdom becomes, because you're, public enemy number one to the Infinite.
Yeah. I think, once again, the idea was that because he had worked on the project, he would have been credible. as opposed to some random conspiracy theorist could have just come on and gone, "This is what's happening," and everybody gone, "Get up."
Yeah, that doesn't happen in real life at all.
So I kind of figured it would have to have been him because he had worked in that field and would have some kind of credibility. But
it would be fun for the Marta angle if he does turn up alive later on in the story.
Yeah, as a bad guy. He actually decides, yeah, your wife, you're right.
Yeah, we've never come across such a well-constructed, manicured, coiffed villain before.
The introduction of the wife being missing. I think Lloyd, you were just waiting for her to make an appearance. Like every corner, you were like, ah!
Day one, yeah.
And I had the
I'm
feeling
just happy
as well
I got my payoff. That's all I was really here for.
that you were expecting her to be part of the conspiracy as well, as opposed to being a victim of it. Was that on your mind, Lloyd?
Well, I was always kind of. It was always kind of my hope was that like the angle of like she like from the start being like, oh, she just left you. It just left you a message. You just couldn't be bothered to read it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I would love it if it turned out she's like one of the people responsible.
Yeah.
And then I got my wish. I just
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
Excellent.
we did get kind of a little foreshadowing with that because when we actually got into, was it? I remember it was not Dr. Smith.
Oh yeah.
Is it
Dr. Wise. Dr. Wise.
Yeah.
And when we got the list of all his patients, and when Dr. Zimmerman's wife was not on there specifically, that was when we got a kind of an indication. Okay, well maybe she's seen by another doctor, or maybe there's a reason why she's not on Dr. Wise's list.
I think there was another one as well. There was another bit of foreshadowing because everybody else, all of their records were being erased, but hers weren't, were they? It was just basically access denied stuff, which was another kind of hint, I suppose.
For me, there was a bit of even earlier foreshadowing, and it turned out he had a wife.
So I suppose the thing was, was that a deliberate choice, Croy, or was that just something that just happily fell into place?
That was definitely something happily that fell into place.
Right, okay.
I know enough that if I do something that's relatively small and unexpected earlier on, then as long as I remember it, or as long as you refer to it and that reminds everybody that it happened, as long as it's still a live thing that happens, it can then be turned around and pulled in. So from a craft perspective, it's a useful, like it is foreshadowing, but you can only call it foreshadowing if the person who's doing it is, it has to pay, so it has to pay off, and so it was a difficult one to balance because we were making it up as we were going along, with this. The thing that helped that was the broad idea that we were more or less pulling in the same direction to get to the end of the story, where we knew that there's something bad in the decline of the Infinite. So we knew it wasn't going to go well for the Infinite. But beyond that, we didn't really know what was going to happen. So the twists that we actually managed to build in as an investigative adventure were phenomenal. And you guys were as much part of that because, like, the thing about your wife, or Lloyd, you introducing this idea that your ship had been retrofitted with something for, and then it all just kind of it's just like, and you're the one thing that the one twist we never got to was we never got to find out what was this
what
kind
was
of dual personality or what.
Well, Adam,
do you know? Actually, do you know, Jay?
Adam was kind of designed to obviously be insane, and basically, it difficult to tell because of the way I produced it. But eventually, somebody may have noticed that the hospital tag was actually on Rofe Gabrua, and the backstory would have been that he's noticing that psychological patients are going missing, and so he subconsciously goes in and fakes to be a doctor, even though he's actually kind of multi-personality or an intern, to avoid being taken himself and gets pulled into the adventure like that. Was one of the ways we may have crafted it in there.
Oh yeah, if we'd been able to maybe go back a little bit further and deeper in hospital, spent more time in hospital, maybe we would have been able to have surfaced that a little bit more.
We started with us all knowing or being together, didn't we? And I suppose we would have actually done a scene for each of us where we kind of played out how we happened to be there.
Yeah.
We could have practiced that a bit more. But I don't know.
Well,
It was I thought it was quite a nice little bit of mystery there going along with Jake.
It was.
It was great.
Yeah, definitely. Talking to himself or his imaginary friend or even the thought of it, the thought I had with that would be that we were talking to John Mark Hicks's original playtest, the concept included people who had developed similar powers to the Infinite. And they themselves, for some reason, had not been tracked and found by the Infinite and brought in and indoctrinated and turned into one of them or killed, whatever. And one of the things I thought that could have been quite an interesting vehicle at that point. One of the things that's going through my head was that your character might have been one part of that cog, or one part of that, a tooth in that cog that was starting to whirl around. Just a sort of initial seed of one of the first that developed this power, but we didn't quite push
no,
that.
I think I mentioned it. I think I mentioned it in one of the sessions that we did, where I suspected that maybe that was the case, that he was actually a psychic.
Yeah. So I mean that's still open, of course. That's still open.
If it's the same powers of the Infinite, you potentially have a vast cosmic intelligence that thinks it's called Adam as well. Or has a friend called Adam.
There's only so much you can do really in 4 sessions, and it was really so jammed packed that the layers upon layers that you could peel back from the stuff that was already put out there, never mind the stuff that wasn't. You have enough to fill many more weeks of content for sure.
Yeah, and the fact that it was all being kind of made up as we went along.
Well, it was, wasn't it? And that was key to where the story went, because at any point there were choices that could have absolutely changed the direction, the events, the scenery. And from my perspective as GM, I introduced things just to chuck them in there to see what you would do with them and to see what would happen. And like a good example, which we have talked about a little bit in the past, was the point where you had introduced this giant structure, which was the space elevator. This huge, massive place is the residence, so it had residencies on it, and it went up into a high orbit and delivered things or brought things down from space. And the idea from that vantage point that you were able to see across the entire sector that you lived in, the whole city, given that this planet was either completely covered in building or it was covered in destruction because it was being mined to the core. And then I'd put in these grey ships, just without any major description or anything, just that they were there, and you saw them land, and you saw one flying towards, and that was great because it put a little bit of concern in your eyes. It was like, oh wait a minute, there's people coming. There's stuff happening. I had a few ideas about what it could be, but I did want to wait and see what you made of it, and so that was quite interesting.
Yeah, it was. The weird thing about that was I'm not sure if it was the players knowing more than the characters, and so as soon as you mention these nondescript spaceships with no markings or anything, we automatically think like, oh, covert op or something like that. Whereas our characters may not have arrived at that conclusion, maybe. But it was fun. At least the cool thing about it is that it got us moving.
Yeah.
And actually doing some proactive. So that was a good use.
But
and then, yeah.
No, I'm just wondering, was there ever any times that you can think of now where you set up a certain situation for us, expecting us to go one or two ways, and we totally just kind of went off in a way that was totally unexpected or surprising to you as kind of the crafter of the setting?
We were operating at such a pace that in the times I didn't even have opportunity to fully determine options and pathways. The only times I was able to do that was at the break or at the end of a session. And I would have ideas in my head about well, what if they do this? What if they do that? And I think towards the end, I absolutely did not expect Mark's character to do an all points bulletin about what was going on. The thought had not even crossed my mind, and the implications of that were massive. I was trying to think about like how quickly would that be distributed? How fast would it get into the various authorities? How quickly would you be found and then dealt with? And what would be the ramifications of that? And that at that point, I was like, oh well, are you going to try and free that capsule, or are you going to try and get these people? And I genuinely didn't know what you were going to do. And then there was a point after that where I was thinking, well, maybe they'll use some sort of biotech to infiltrate the bodies, or maybe they'll create an uprising with the sort of capitalize off the back of the uprising. Maybe they'll just hoof it and try and do something else. And at that point I wasn't sure what you would do. I didn't know if you were going to take the contract that you were offered, and that was the ruse to try and. In fact, even when I said that, it wasn't a ruse at that point. It was a genuine opportunity, because I got the sense that you wanted to be up on the ship, so I gave that opportunity. But it wasn't a ruse at that point. It wasn't a twist. When I offered that, it was absolutely not. It was a genuine, right, we need you guys. We're taking all these ships up. We need you to pilot them. And then it was only like during the discussions and further, I was sort of, you were, and I was like, oh, that'd be a good opportunity for a bit of a twist. And so it became that there was a pretense to get you in so that you could meet the wife, so that you could be talked down. And I was thinking that there was maybe the opportunity to get you to counteract your message and you'd be forced to put out some like, oh, I just made this up, or I'm sick, or I'm not well and I apologize, that kind of stuff, like a forced retraction. And none of, so yeah, there was loads of times there was just little things like that all the time. It was just moving so quick that there was, other than at the end of the game, I wasn't ever able to properly form pathways in my head. So yeah, difficult.
Yeah, because I think I was, when we did that, when I made my character kind of do that little packet, I thought that we were just trying to get it out of that area of space, to another planet or whatever. I thought that's what we were doing. So I was a bit surprised when that came back to bite me in the arse.
Well, if you remember, it was Lloyd's.
Yeah, it was Lloyd's character contact, wasn't it? And I thought that he'd got like a fast ship and he was going to take that and hotfoot it, a bit like escaping with the Death Star plans or whatever.
Yeah.
I thought that's how I envisaged it in my mind. And then, so I was a little bit on the back foot when it suddenly kind of came back as, we know who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it was tight beamed, I'd kind of imagined it to have been tight beamed on some sort of secure connection.
Yeah.
I don't know what. So in terms of connections in the underworld, we did play a little bit on Galen's shadowy side, with his ability to crack open lifts and walk in the shadows of buildings. Like, what did you?
The kind of transponder thing that would.
Yeah, it was always like
somewhere else. He always dodgy geezer. A bit like Lloyd himself, really.
Rude. You're just jealous, old man.
No.
Yeah, what
hey, without me, you wouldn't have got anyway.
That's right.
You'll just be still sat in your lounge drinking whiskey, being like, "Oh, my wife's been gone for a while."
I know, living the dream, man.
So what was
days of my life?
How much of the background had you conceived for your character, Lloyd? Had you thought that he was like this sort of supreme smuggler type, or data broker, or what was the?
I had I think like I came up with like the sort of like a brief like synopsis of like, oh, this is like his day job, and then to kind of facilitate like the stuff to sort of come, I built it in the idea with like his like stealth and subterfuge sort of roles to just be like, oh, he's got a sideline in these sort of like gray areas, like because there's always like with like people that operate like transport, there's always someone who will do like a smuggling or a favor or a pickup or whatever.
Yeah.
So I figured if he was doing that for like the less fortunate, because being sort of stratified society.
Yeah.
That would sort of give a way of accessing those sort of parts of the narrative.
Yes. Yeah, shadowy smuggler, Robin Hood kind of esque type thing. It was interesting background, and the idea of having all of that, an intern, an eminent scientist, and this kind of dodgy smuggler type, dodgy geezer, was what a mix of characters. Do you think if we played it with another, do you think in terms of number in the game, do you think 3 characters for this kind of thing was good? Did it give you enough space? Did you have too much to fill in? Did you think that there was, was it enough? Would another player around the table have benefited the narrative or the story or your character development?
I think like it always helps. I think like having this like an extra like having the 4, because then you just have like an extra person you can bounce ideas off. And,
yeah.
Like bits where we kind of stalled. Like if there was another person, then potentially they would have like sort of plugged those sort of gaps.
Yeah, because I think there were definite moments, weren't there, where we were stuck and weren't quite sure where we were going to go next. So maybe but saying that, I thought that the pace was pretty good, and I'm not sure if that was because there was only the 3 players.
Yeah.
It kept us moving pretty quick. We weren't dragging our heels at any.
Yeah,
and
I think
the fact
it's a sort of narrative focus rather than like role focus.
And Galen was really 2 characters, if you think about it, because he was also a pilot extraordinaire and could fly anything, and then he was also kind of hacker and had access to. So, with the 3 characters, we really had 4 roles covered brilliantly.
And your character was literally 2 characters.
Yeah.
So we had 5. So we should have 5, Croy. That's the answer.
That's the answer. Next time we do it, we'll do 5, but you all have to have just one personality.
Yeah.
1, 2, 5, 3, sir.
Yeah. I mean, I think that kind of would bring you around a bit. I don't know if you want to talk about character generation like that right here, or whether you want to say.
Yeah, you mentioned it, so why not? Let's go for it.
Because I struggled with that a little bit. I had an idea as to what kind of character I wanted to be, and then we were kind of randomly getting particular skills, and so I was really struggling to figure out why my character, who's this eminent scientist, really good at sneaking but really bad at tech. I couldn't get my head around it all. He was good at science. We were allowed to. The way it worked, we were allowed to choose one of the skills, and that was going to be our top skill, and that would kind of define your professional level ability or whatever. And the rest of it was all kind of randomly rolled as to what skill you were going to get, which is kind of interesting, but it does make some weird characters.
We could always experiment. Like next time we run it, of like, what if you had more like that, like you pick, so you have like a kit.
Yeah.
Versus like it's like this, just to kind of like maybe as examples for other people, or just a thing of like like maybe 2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
So you have like more of a core, because like the having the picked one as your main one helps. But yeah, the thing is, then you're at the mercy of the dice rolls for like, how your character fleshes out, and you can like end up with as a character that's sort of all over the place. You'd be like,
Yeah.
I have no idea how to make a narrative.
That's right. Or you might get lucky. You might roll a character and everything absolutely makes sense. I think you were quite lucky, weren't you, Lloyd, when you'd done it? I think you.
Well, because I think mine is just like just they all. I think because they all ended up sort of clustering around like the bottom half of like skill number.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so like.
Yeah.
Like, so his ideas of being like, oh, he was like one of the Air Force people, like that idea had to be ditched because like he got like I think close combat, and that was like his only contribution to the fight would have been like if we had to do like fisticuffs.
Yeah, whereas I'd rolled
like
ranged
combat.
I've got ranged combat somehow. As one of my higher skills, and it's like that sneaking around and being a scientist. But being
like
really bad with technology.
I got lucky with stealth and subterfuge. And technology. And that's the thing is like, it's hard to be a stealth character if you can sneak or steal. You can't do both.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
because I think originally those two skills kind of need to fit together.
Because we were kind of discussing that when we were rolling up the characters, and I was kind of saying, well, maybe my guy's some kind of industrial spy, and then I didn't get subterfuge at all.
Yeah,
but I had this sneak that I'd roll. Yeah, it was a bit inconsistent, a bit weird.
Well, Rufy, how did
it also depends how you look at the rules, because you might take two roles that are complementary and similar, and despite the fact that you're good in one and have the other, kind of use the one you're good at for most of the roles that you're going to make. I found that not being able to choose, or choosing just one of your skills and then basing a character after you've rolled everything else was quite interesting. It was, so out of the ordinary that it was something that I embraced for this.
Yeah. It's kind of old school, isn't it? Randomly rolling, randomly creating a character. It's kind of an old school thing. But I don't know. Maybe it's to do with the actual skills that we've got listed, those particular skills. Perhaps if they'd have had a bit more, if we'd have had more narrow focus, less and then have them stealth and subterfuge could have been the same skill.
Yeah,
and you can narrow them down like that and have less of them, because I think we ended up with 12.
Yeah, 12. I think. Yeah, it's quite a few anyway.
So you could probably cut them down and or incorporate them into each. Amalgamate a few of them, and perhaps it would have made a bit more sense that way when you're rolling. Okay, so I'm good at sneaking about.
There's definitely a few ways to play about with that, and one of them could be that you choose one as your main skill and then you get to swap two or something. That could be potentially, or but that means that it sounds like you're all the other part of character creation that we didn't touch upon was the idea that you could swap out one of your skill rolls and put that into your luck, risk, and get a massive boost. You got a massive boost to your risk points.
Yeah,
and none of you took that.
No, it's quite weird.
Yeah,
when you're
it's a hard assessment to make as well, just because
it was. I mean, the weird thing was when we were playing the game. I mean, I think I spent all of my risk points. I think Jake, you probably did too. I think Lloyd, you had quite a few left at the end.
I barely.
Whereas I wasn't worried about spending them at all, even though we only had the base amount. So I think really you'd probably need to bring the amount of risk points you start with down to maybe encourage people to lose one of their skills to put it into risk instead. Maybe to just because it felt like you were wasting a skill for a few points that we didn't spend all of anyway.
No, I find the problem with that as well is then you don't want to have that sort of complete randomness. You want that complete randomness thing, you want even less, because you're like, I might need this skill to balance out, to actually have a hope of having something that's sort of cohesive. And you're like, but I have to give something up to have extra hit points. And you're like, I don't know which one, I could do that and it could seriously break my concept or whatever.
Seeing how the risk did play out and getting down to zero, and then even not having risk, even at the 2-for-1 for helping another character, it feels kind of bad to me not to have that and be able to who knows what the next is going to bring, the next scene will bring. So I think definitely in the future I would have done it, seeing how the game plays and how fast you can get out of risk. And again, given that we're rolling randomly, if I found that I was good in a skill that really didn't fit my character concept, now having that experience, I would definitely, forego having the skill and, the numbers in that skill and bring it into risk. But just a little bit difficult to visualize prior to having played the game further.
Yeah. I really like the idea of the risk and the fact you could spend them to help other players. Now, I think that's a great, really, really cool idea. But because you got so many of them, I didn't ever. I mean, maybe it's because we got lucky with rolls or whatever. I don't know.
You were good, you rolled high, typically.
Yeah, that we didn't have to spend that many. But I didn't feel like my character was in any real danger at any point, because I knew that once I'd eaten through those risk points, you've still got your strength. That's when it gets serious.
With mine, I only had only the one strength. So that's why I was more willing to let a roll fail than risk on it. But the thing is, if you want to reduce the number of risk points you have to kind of encourage people to use it, there's also that. Because of the increased cost of helping someone else, then you're also less likely to help someone unless you really, really have to. Because
but I mean, it gives you an opportunity to be kind of heroic. I mean, that was, I think, the original idea.
Yeah.
That Jonathan was thinking of when he introduced the whole idea of the risk points, because it gives characters the opportunity to be heroes. You're sacrificing something to assist another character, and I kind of think that's kind of a neat idea, and I'd like that. I think just maybe we had too many risk points. I mean, so if it was me, reduce the number of risk points that you start with. I would reduce the number of abilities that I'd cut those right down, amalgamate a few of them, and then maybe the random character generation would work better for me. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what everybody else kind of feels.
I think that when I was down to 3 risk, already I was nervous.
Yeah.
I think every time that I expressed an idea that was kind of going against the infinite, I was nervous. I mean, just reading and getting into the game and knowing all of these things, my character was under an extreme amount of stress most of the time, but more so when I lost risk. And then when I'm at 0, I'm like, okay, when's the hammer going to drop? Because the infinite are coming to get me. The boogeyman is going to take me away. And I have absolutely 0 resources to fight this with, and then Dr. Zimmerman has 0 resources, and then, what's Galen gonna do? For sure, he's not gonna spend risk on saving me. He's gonna get into the ship and get out of there. There was always this sense that something's gonna happen, the hammer is gonna drop, and then what am I gonna do? Totally, and it's this feeling of not being in control of the situation at all. And not having the resources to manage what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
That to me sounds like a good opportunity to talk about the ending.
Okay.
And to think about where you left off and what possibilities your characters had. Or even if we backtracked a little bit and did, if an alternative decision, if you can pinpoint an alternative decision that we made or was made as a group or as a DM, as a GM, where would you have forked the story if you wanted to have it to come at a different ending? What would that have been? And or if you think about where the ending is that we had, where might that go and what might happen next while you're stuck on this giant tithe ship?
Yeah, I mean, because I wasn't entirely sure we were going to make it on to this ship. I mean, you said you seemed to think that was the way we were heading, and I think Lloyd had suggested kind of getting on there and finding some way to sabotage it. And I'm not sure if you were thinking along the same lines, Jake. That.
Well, my thoughts were kind of heading towards, where exactly was this going? And again, with everything going on in my mind that, the Infinite know what we're doing and know what we're saying? I mean, is it going to be some sort of shock trooper that's going to come down on me? Or, is it going to be that, people are going to be put in pods, they're going to be put on ships, and that is the way, and I was kind of thinking that maybe the story is going that way, so that everybody that was being put on these ships were potential future rebels that were identified. And so going through that, I wasn't sure if, again, getting us on that ship, making the machinations for that, and the only thing that held me back from that was this other dark concept going on that the Infinite never asked for people. This was people doing it to people because they just had nothing else to do. So I was kind of conflicted between there. I definitely think that could have been a fork.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one as well.
Because that was an interesting point, because I'd kind of got it into my head. When we'd done the microscope thing, that the Infinite, whoever they are, had kind of suggested that because people weren't able to meet the demands that were being asked of them, and then it was why did they want the people? What were they doing with them? What was it they? It kind of seems a bit weird when they kind of said, "Oh, we'll just send some people instead of the raw materials." What are they going to do with these guys? Going to go take them away and build a bridge out of them, or
and that was really good.
Or was it done for punishment purposes? Meaning, you better get your act together. This is the consequence.
Yeah, I whether or not it would have been more, the fact that it was, people were willing to do this to other people is pretty dark, and that's quite an unpleasant thought. But if they were doing it because they'd been told to, it's still bad that the people are willing to go along with it. But then
they're doing it under duress.
They were doing it under duress. But
no, but that has the twinge of collaboration, which is really also a very dark concept.
Yes. But it's just the fact that they want these people something. But what would you use a human being for as a resource? What would you be using them for? Would you be using them for, I mean, I think I threw out the idea that maybe they were using them for fuel or food.
Yeah.
And things like that, which is a kind of a terrifying prospect.
Well, I was throwing with the idea of that they used them as materials for the sunburners themselves,
and I think that was touched on in Microscope as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, but we didn't. Just unfortunately we didn't, because of the angle when it turned out to be we're giving them as a gift. We just have to hope that they accept it.
So, that was kind of that might have been something that I think.
Yeah, we could have made the issue that I had at that fork was, how is the will of the Infinite received, or how is it known? And this idea we touched on early on about these guys who actually did worship the Infinite and did the whole ceremony properly and etc. But how do the prefects, the rectors, all of the administration of planets, how do they get to know what the will is? And so I had more going, I guess, that if that fork had been explored, we would have found out more about that side of things. We would have gone into that. We would have maybe looked into where does it come from and how does it work?
You did touch on that a little bit, didn't you? With you're kind of saying that Dr. Abore was getting these voices in his head telling him what to do. So I mean, is that then basically the fact that maybe they did tell him, just send some people, and that they were able to read his mind, and that,
or maybe more kind of like it was like a really bad interpretation of a dream or a vision. And it was still left. It wasn't maybe a direct instruction, but it was a human interpreting what was there. It's like, oh, we need to give of the planet. We need to give what we have on the planet. That's all they're interested in. Well, what do we have if we can't get platinum and precious metals out of this in enough quantity, given that we've had our knuckles wrapped the past 2 years. What else do we have? Oh shit, we have people. Yeah, all right then. And that concept of forking out into these people being identified specifically as rebels, and this is how the Infinite. We would have explored much more of the Infinite's power, I think, than we maybe did. It was a bit more nebulous and a bit more opaque. What we actually did.
Or is the idea was that at this point in the timeline that we weren't supposed to know much about what they were, and we were trying to keep them mysterious. That was the
and that's an interesting reflection as a potential fork about what could have gone off and where it could have gone. Whether it still would have ended up with, I mean, that fork could have perceived you guys being bundled into. That could have been the end. You know, it could have been you having been chased and tried to escape and then got caught and eventually bundled into one of these tubes. If the tubes even existed, I can't even remember at what point the tubes came in exactly. There was talk of your work in cryogenics, but that kind of pinged off.
It was to try and link my thing with his. You're like, oh, you work in cryogenics, and be like, oh, that like my hook for trying to get into the like human trafficking thing was like, oh, they've installing like the freight like the
equipment.
To kind of tie them together.
But I think the cylinders came in, the tubes came in when we were investigating these grey unmarked spaceships.
The people that landed next to us.
Yeah, and there were people being taken out, and that's where that idea. Although I think, as you say, because Lloyd had suggested that his equipment had been put in his machine, I think we'd all obviously unconsciously latched onto that idea that these cryopods, there were going to be some kind of cryopods with people. So I think we were all pretty much there at that point anyway.
Yeah. So, and other branches, was there any other opportunity that you saw? Lloyd, I think you were trying to save everybody.
There was a point that I was considering, and also because I got reminded during the risk conversation of a different way I could play it as well. So when we had that bit where we had the cliffhanger of like, oh, it's his wife. Yeah. Like my thought for the week before was like, what I'm tempted to do is like for the very first conversation for like the following Friday was to be like, here's your husband as requested, to basically like give them up, like basically turn on them. But then I was like, oh, I can't do that. But then I was thinking of like, thanks to that like conversation earlier, that like I've got skill in like charisma. I've got like a lot of risk points left, so I could just be like, here, I'm gonna give myself +10 to a D12 roll for like I want to like make a devil's bargain to keep my like.
I mean, I think if that could have come out in that last episode, that Galen was all along working for the bad guys.
Well, the thing is, I think that's the thing. We kind of got up there, and then we had like the sort of fade to black bit. We didn't really. We didn't really spend a lot of time where like to like flesh out anything. So like that's the thing with the twist. At that point, it'd be like I was sort of saying to the guys earlier before we started the stream of like a good follow-up adventure would be quite cool if you have like people like this that have taken like a devil's bargain or been like converted in some way to like work from the other side.
Come back as
because that gives you an easier way of like if you want to explore like that sort of like the oppressive side of the universe.
Yeah.
Without having to worry about like how do we get these random people from like this like farm planet to this high-tech research facility somewhere in this nebula.
Yeah.
But you know that raises an interesting point because I remember a scene that sticks out in my mind when Galen was taking Dr. Zimmerman's proclamation and sending it out through his contacts, and when the contacts got it and then they were like, "Wait, are you sure? Is this real? Am I sending it out?" The way I saw it role playing out was like almost like there was some sort of it wasn't just honor amongst thieves at that point. There was also some sort of camaraderie. And so Galen and his contacts would have made a great basis for, the core of a rebellion, because they're properly placed. They're good at doing kind of, sneaky things and stealing and getting and doing, and that's exactly what you need in a rebellion. I mean, you have the basis of the rebellion in Galen and his gang, and then, Dr. Zimmerman and I are just, being recruited or coming in or entering that kind of life because it was so well placed for, the basis of having a rebellion.
Yeah. That's the thing as well, like, I know they kind of like the Star Wars have that, like, Andor character where you have that thing of, like, because you have the whole thing of rebellion, like, no one really cares, like, the early days, like, how they got started.
Right.
They care about, like, the branding and, like, the hero image, and you're like, oh, probably a lot of innocent and bad people probably got killed getting us to this point, but we don't worry about them. The good fight, like, sticking it to the man that we do now, that's the important bit.
One interesting question came up from Red Monk for Croy. Had there been more meanwhiles redeemed? What content were you thinking about and preparing for that about the bad guys?
Oh, were you preparing?
I was preparing nothing for this entire series. I was trying to avoid preparing.
Well, it was collaborative.
It was collaborative.
Yeah, you can't join a collaborative adventure being like, oh, you didn't make it all up for me. I don't want to do work.
So
I really avoided planning anything.
I really like the meanwhiles. I mean, you know me, Red. I mean, I'm quite happy to come up with nonsense off the cuff anyway, and it really fits with that. So I was very happy. The one that we did do was a bunch of scientists all pissing about with some sort of holographic field that ended up generating an extra pinky on the hand of one of the scientists who'd drawn the short straw, put his hand in it. I have no idea where that came from at all. I mean, that might have been something I'd seen on my son's on net when he was watching something on Ninjago Lego, or it could have been something in the Beano, or it might have been something I watched on Netflix with Ash. I don't know. But it was there anyway. I've got loads of those kind of things, so I would genuinely.
To be honest, I was thinking when that came up, you can actually really use those meanwhile, play effectively like little cut scenes between some of the bad guys, just to kind of get some of the story across, or the plot.
Yeah. Well, we did a bit of that anyway with the scenes that we had with the ship approaching and almost like a countdown, a timer of this vast ship entering into the solar system. Yeah. And just watching it sort of ease, and I really had the kind of cinematics in my head at that point that we've seen in films like Alien and Star Wars and these big, huge, fast vessels. And I just wanted it to be. In my head, I just wanted it to be this spectacle of this huge. This is the work of the infinite. You know, this is how big they are. This is the scale they operate on. It can eclipse a moon, kind of thing. You know, it's just vast. So, yeah, I would have been. That was a kind of a little bit of cheeky little meanwhiles just at the end to provide a little bit of that. But it would have been, you're right. It would have been great to have used the meanwhiles in that way. Or the other side of the tail. That would have been. That's actually that is a good call. To have that.
Quite a nice way to use meanwhile if you were to do that kind of game again.
Yeah. I think Infinity put it meanwhile in, didn't he? I think he added that.
It wasn't even meant for this game.
Oh,
it wasn't even meant for this. It was something that Infinity had talked about briefly. For I think it was Mutants and Mastermind. He was when it first came up, he kind of said he quite liked the idea of having this meanwhile thing, and people could redeem points, and then he would narrate some random scene from around the world or of whatever was going on. It's from maybe another perspective.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, that's definitely something.
So. And then I didn't even realize he'd added it into the into the Twitch, but it was quite cool. I quite liked. I appreciated the fact that somebody went and looked and dropped it in, because we didn't have too many people offering up points to change the plot direction. But
that was a difficult one. That was tricky. We need to work on that a bit. I don't think we're quite there at doing that. I've done a similar thing in my elsewhere where we've done improvised storytelling, and then chat can drop in plot points, but It's a difficult one because it has to not break the story.
Yeah.
It has to not be like overly detrimental to any of the characters or the NPCs, but it also has to be meaningful to chat so that their suggestion is recognizable within the story. And that's a difficult balance to get, and it would take time. I think regulars to IMT and who know the individual players and the GMs would probably get the balance, after a fashion. But like somebody like we had one I've done in the past. We've done something similar, and somebody it was Stonebrick Studios came in and said the power goes out, which was fine because the power went out in the story. But then somebody else came in and said the power went on. I think it was Infinity. It was Infinity who said that. So what kept happening in the story, which it was fine for that particular story, but what kept happening was the power chat would say the power's off, the power's on, the power's off, the power's on, and this battle between chat just kept on going through the story. And for that particular bit of storytelling, it was fine. But that's the balance that we had to, because we were trying to get a little bit darker. And it's not to say you can't have those periods of levity, but that's the other thing that if chat are wanting a bit of a reprieve from the darkness, then that levity could be brought in through Meanwhile and through plot points and that kind of stuff as well. So that's an interesting marker and input of where chat are and where they might like the story to go, and a little bit of that. But this was always billed as a gritty, dark, dystopian sci-fi space opera type, spanning aeons and light years and all the rest of it. So, but yeah, that concept of getting chat involved is really interesting, and I'd like to pursue it more, but I think we maybe need to codify it a little bit better so it's clearer, our intentions a little bit, just to what kind of thing is. And that's maybe a discussion.
Spend all your time redeeming the points, well, giving points back to people.
Yeah, so I think we need to maybe have a chat about that in IMT generally across the whole community in Discord, and just see how could it work and what works and what doesn't in that regard. Because for a collaborative storytelling game, it makes sense to have chat also involved. If we're streaming it, it really does. So that side of things.
I know that when we were talking after, post one of the sessions that we have, you mentioned how you're able to craft a scene or a session in a story and set pace and tone and tension and bring them all together. Can you talk a little bit about how you've done that, or where where you found that worked particularly well in the telling of a scene?
Yeah. It doesn't work without having awesome role players at the table. And all you guys are that.
Yeah, exactly. Nevertheless,
I think a good example we have talked about already were the grey ships landing on the roof, and that could have been anything. That was a kind of just a little outside. There's still a world out there. Something's happening. You are part of this wider world. There are events happening that are not under your control. You are still very much part of this world. But I didn't know what they were. I had ideas that they could have been shock troops sent down to catch you because they knew that you were having that. And that would have been a fork. We talked about potential forks. That would have been a huge fork. If I had turned those guys into chasing you and you were trying to escape them, that would have been a completely different direction to go in. But in terms of providing tension and mystery, it totally worked, because just from that simple idea, you all riffed with that and around it, and you talked about it, and then the idea of watching them, going back to the ship to have a look to see what they were, and then having this 360 view and watching them cart these. I mean, that all came out of just that one seed, that one little seed of putting those grey ships on the roof as you were going down this glass lift. And the power going out. The power going out was another one. That was a continuation of that theme. Once I had spotted the power just dropping and plunging you into darkness and stopping the lift, and the tension that builds. It's not a nice feeling, especially. So yeah, that was one that I think worked quite well. The other one the other one was maybe to think on was a bit later, when you went off to a different scene and you jetted off and you tried to track that ship, and we never made a lot of that tracking of the ship. But you kind of inveigled your way into that ship landed. So that ship just landed with this rookie on it, this rookie pilot that just graduated. And they landed, and that was just like another character, an NPC introduced, and then Dr. Zimmerman decided that he was going to try and track the ship to see where it went. And we could have maybe followed that up and followed the ship, and there could have been a fork there that had gone off. But the very fact of putting that character on had worked well, because it provided Dr. Zimmerman with the opportunity to roll and do. You had a great bit of role play with that character where you were just like, oh yeah, you know, it's just, it was, yeah. So you know, that worked, and I think that's where the you guys. I mean, it's understand, like, for my money, I like fast-paced games. Not necessarily like breakneck combat all the time, but just where, even when we're doing investigative games and you know, we're in a room or we're in the garden, we're looking up in the window and we're seeing something, a guy with a hat on, that kind of thing.
You don't want to hang about in a scene, right? It's
yeah, you don't want to, yeah, unless there's there occasionally are, but I like it when it moves about between characters. So even if I'm not on the scene, I like the fact that so that kind of sense of timing as well. It's just a sense of, well, and then also listening to what you guys are saying. Have you had pauses where I can tell that you're starting to get to the point where you're feeling yourself that you don't necessarily know or want to take it any further, and jumping in just a little bit before you look like you've just kind of like, what? I mean, there are occasions where I let that. I definitely didn't jump in, and I let you go to that stage because it was up to you to figure out what you were doing. But in terms of setting that pace, it's just like keeping it going. So introducing something else at that point for you to have that interest and explore. The one thing that, sorry, carry on. All I was going to say was the only thing that I changed that I was really happy about, that I really, really would do and recommend to anybody running the game, is I got rid of doors. They either worked or they didn't. That was it.
Nice.
You couldn't try. No, only the poshest people in the highest part of the world had doors that you had to manhandle to open. Every other door, you either had clearance to get in it or you didn't, and that just cuts out a whole lot of trouble.
I think you kind of avoid a lot of issues in science fiction games because you don't assume that every door's trapped.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Absolutely.
Well, there you go.
Roll for, yeah.
And I think the other thing about we were talking about tension, I suppose, the fact that we were probably aware that we had a time limit. There was a definite.
Bless you.
She'll be done in a minute. There might be another one. No, we're okay. It's only two this. Bless you, dear. That fact that we had this time limit, which meant that we couldn't hang. We had to do something to move pretty quickly. So that kind of helped as well. I think it certainly meant that I thought it, felt like pushing ourselves along.
Yeah.
Get somewhere quick.
Yep.
And it also was that one of those situations where towards the end, I kind of figured my character was probably realizing that it doesn't matter what happens now. Where we are, and all of us are screwed. It doesn't matter. It's not about that anymore. It's about telling everybody else this is going on.
So what if then we had managed to get an engineering of all of the pods being jettisoned and returned safely or not safely?
I think Lloyd would have liked that.
Well, the problem I would have found is like if because they're just gonna, what are they gonna do? They just land. The people aren't wake up, and you're like, well, they're just back where they started.
I guess.
But they could have had a connection with the Infinite that was broken, and maybe they all had a partial connection to the Infinite that would have been made more strong if they had been, maybe that's one of the things that happens when they were in the. We could have made that. We could have run with that if that's what had happened. I still think you ended up with a gritty end, because at least that was kind of in the minds of. Well, I know it was in my mind that you guys probably weren't going to have like a heroic ending.
The things I would have probably pushing for would have been like sabotage or cutting a deal.
Yeah.
Whereas I was heading for the noble sacrifice. The fact that we were all had it.
Yeah.
But as long as we can warn everybody else, that
not the 19th century. People don't want heroic sacrifices anymore.
I think the whole tone of the module led us down the path that we knew as players that this wasn't going to end well, but the characters kept struggling to find a way to win, to win over the situation, to save the people, to be the heroes, and utterly failed at every turn, basically. I mean, anytime we actually succeeded at something, so we cracked Dr. Weiss. Okay, great. And we get to so we got to move forward. But then it was kind of 2 steps back from there ever since. Every step forward was 2 steps back. But the characters never stopped trying. They were very invested in the horror of people being sent up as tied. It just
which is kind of where I like that where it would have been like the noble sacrifice would have been the payoff, I think, for them in that regard. The fact they weren't going to win, they probably weren't even going to survive, but they could have accomplished something, whether it be crashing their spaceship into the big bad guys.
And that's one of the unknowns that we left at the end, was what had Dr. Zimmerman engineered with the plasma coils in the ship. What exactly was going to happen with this atomic restructuring of the entire vessel? Where was it going? Like how big an explosion would it be? These ships were absolutely vast. Would it be noticed if a small part of it got exploded, or would the explosion rip through and begin a chain reaction and the ship crash down into the planet and
because
destroy?
We have no real idea of the technology or anything that's going on here at all. We can't answer that question.
Or if we do, then we make it canon.
The only way to find out is to try.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it could have been stupidly futile and pointless death, or it could have actually done something. And the 3 characters would have been martyred.
One of the endings that I had envisaged at one point when I was imagining what the closing scene could be like was just this huge ship just going
crashed into the plane, killing everyone.
Causing a massive event. But that was a possibility, but it did stop happening.
I kind of figured it couldn't happen because that comes later on in the timeline.
Yeah.
I don't know really if
armor.
Dr. Zimmerman, as being an eminent scientist, and he is, tops in his field. If his decisiveness of action and decision making was Dr. Zimmerman, the character, or Mark, the player, but every time a decision was made and the story was being pushed forward that way, to me it kind of seemed like, poking Croy. Okay, here it is, now what are you going to do? Now what are you going to do? And like, holy crap, he just did that. Oh my God, he just did that. Edge of my seat.
Yeah, I mean, I think is we did get some quite nice little kind of cliffhanger bit, but it was generally down. I had no freaking idea what I was doing at all, and every decision that I made was a panic on my part. It was nothing to do with nothing to do Dr. Zimmerman being decisive. It's just me going, what the fuck do I do now? And so that's kind of where it was just happy circumstance that it sometimes occasionally worked out.
So what were the cliffhangers we had? Did we manage a cliffhanger at the end of every episode? Did we get to that point?
I think Jake. Or did it all blur into one?
Jake's heart rate tracker.
That would tell you. Yeah. Well,
we had one where you were watching the ships, and we saw the ships just landing and delivering the people into the Tanya Ellis or Tanya Elsie, because I changed the name of it because I forgot.
Yeah.
But the Tanya Ellis Centre, and that was really the cliffhanger. That was that was like a wee cutaway scene at the end of it.
Yeah.
I can't
I think
remember.
the first one we ended with I think the other ships going to the other towers. Like you sort of see them around. Now that you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was the one where Zimmerman's wife.
That was the big one, wasn't it? That was
There was another one before that, and I can't remember what it was. But
I think that was the one where we
wake someone up.
Open the pod.
Oh,
exactly.
that was it. Yes,
that was it.
That was it. Yeah,
Yep.
was great. Yeah, nice one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were just about to do that with the key that
we were
you'd
just
been...
about to open one of the pods. Yeah.
And so you didn't know. Yeah, that was good. So yeah, we did all right. I think, providing a bit of the intrigue. Jake's personal assistant on his smartphone is currently telling his insurance company to increase his life insurance premium just because of his heart rate spiking so frequently. It was
just
great
like a
to
good
see.
cliffhanger.
A lot of sleepless nights in between, let me tell you.
Excellent. And that, to be fair as well, in terms of, that's one thing I had thought about that I'd want you to mention for today as well, was the investment that I felt in that story, even though I hadn't prepared in the same way that I would normally for D&D, or especially for Cthulhu Dark, which of all the things I do requires the most prep in terms of storytelling. But like the idea of this time, just seeing all the ideas transfer off, and it was great. Time flew by for me. And it was testament to you guys role playing, and me sitting back and enjoying what you were up to, your interactions with each other, and obviously with the NPCs as well. But yeah, it was a great way to collaborate and tell a story. Will we be able to pull it off again? I mean, will it be possible to achieve similar with different people, same people, different part of the timeline on Microscope, or
I think the fact that we did Microscope before really kind of helped me, because I was able to then that's how I was saying that I kind of knew that it wasn't going to be a happy ending of it, and so I was working towards that. I mean, Jake, you weren't part of the Microscope, so I don't know if you found that more difficult, or whether you just felt you were being dragged along by the rest of it, screaming, "No, don't be so stupid!"
It felt very surreal. It felt almost like, one of these, 1970s sci-fi movies where the people are the cows, and on
Sonic
one hand,
Green is people kind of thing. Yeah.
But what helped ground my character, I think, was Galen. His character was very well grounded. It was very it was a sense of stability. Okay, where Dr. Zimmerman is going off and confronting the world and righteous indignation, to his superiors and everywhere else. Galen was like, okay, we're gonna get the job done. This is what we have to do. This is what we're gonna do next. So actually, playing off those two character types, it helped keep me balanced, I think, and helped me keep me, better grounded in the story, even though I did miss that, that kind of, intro.
Yeah, I was kind of curious, because
so we're all agreeing that Mark needs to work on his characters. That's what I'm hearing.
I
French
almost,
all
I
week,
almost
folks?
appreciate going in without the preconceived notions. And yes, it was a little bit more difficult maybe for me to develop my character per se as quickly. I felt like my character was developing throughout the story, and my history was being created as I was moving forward by doing things, and that I appreciated. But,
I think if we'd been able to like focus on like a bit more time, on your character, like just to sort of give a bit more limelight and sort of like flesh him out a bit more, it probably would have helped.
Yeah.
I'm more focused on the action and what are we going to do now than, what is it that had kind of brought me here, because I'm still in the mindset of trying to solve the riddle, trying to solve the problem, putting all the pieces together so that it frames up really nicely. And that's kind of almost impossible to do in this situation. Nothing is going to frame up nicely. You're going to be disappointed. This is it's a disappointing story you never want to end. You want to keep trying. You want to keep seeing what can you do to change. You want to keep pushing more. You want to do it over and over again until you get the right formula, even if it never happens.
Lloyd mentioned a part of that continuum that you thought at one point that you would get into the ship, but then the ship would take you we had to go to the planet in order for the thing. Then the planet would take us to, and I think Lloyd, would you have seen it go faster? Would you like to have explored like less of the planet and then maybe got out into space? Was that something on your mind when you were doing it? Because that continuum that Jake's talking about in terms of pushing it and just wanting to keep going and keep going and keep going, sounds like the two of you maybe kind of have. Yeah,
because I think like the one thing is like when you have these sort of like industrial sort of forge world sort of things, like those sort of like city concepts are kind of like explored quite a lot. So like you kind of like, okay, so this is like a grounding thing that we're kind of already sort of familiar with. And then, like, let's try it, I guess, push to sort of, just sort of develop more or see more of the world, I guess.
Of the world, yeah. So, Jake, in terms of the character, then, would you have pushed us off world if you had been given more opportunity to get us
there? Was enough content on world to explore that as a completionist in general, I would have been sorry to have skipped over those elements in favor of a grander story. I think I always like, the details, and the details are kind of what fleshes out the world and makes it more real. All I'm saying is I think given more time and continuum of it, and I almost see the continuation of the story as a continuation years later without the same characters. Because, and then once we start playing newer characters and we're less invested in the older characters, we can start to tell stories what happened to them. Because we're kind of still playing with new characters anyways. That may be totally different based on the rolling system and rolling them up and have a different part to play in the stories. And once you move to part B of the story, it's almost easier to fill in part A.
But can we do that then? Can we now move with new characters to part B and jump to another stage forward at some point? Is that something that we can do? Is that something we want to do? Do we want to explore?
Well, and that would really be telling, like, where are we in the timeline? So, we knew where we were in the timeline here. What has happened in the interim years? What has happened to humanity, to people? What have they developed? How has their relationship with the IMT either changed or deteriorated or improved or whatever? And then, maybe there are more collaborators and... It's definitely a worthwhile... I mean, the base was so well done that the possibilities for continuation are... You can continue right where we left off with the same characters. You can give it a gap of time and develop a timeline and then start new. Technology could have changed. It could have regressed. It could have progressed, depending on things that have happened.
One of the issues that was quite fun at the beginning was I was pushing you to come up with what kind of planet you were on. partly because, as written, the rules suggested that if you were on a less advanced planet, you would start with different. The start would be differently, and we saw that in the one shot that we did way back when we first touched on this, which as the GM. But we started on a wealthy planet, and that was great because it really did open up that. And I know Lloyd is saying that we've these kind of cyberpunkish cityscapes and industrial planets, and I love it. Like Coruscant is always a great place to be, but we've got all of these abilities to see all of this happen and actually explore it. So I was really happy with the concept of the premise of this particular planet. But there are so many other planets out there. There are so many other different planets, and if you think about our own planet, one planet, and we've got areas of poverty and destitution right next to places of extreme wealth within hundreds of miles of each other. But we're talking here about planets that are separated by light years. It opens up that huge amount of galaxy to explore and different planets. So yeah, if we did do it again, I would love to see a different type of planet. Agricultural planet or a desert planet. Well, we did desert kind of the first time. That was sort of a deserty planet, wasn't it? That was pretty destitute. It's great. I think as a pilot of a game, a pilot of a style of playing a game, of the rules, of the story, I think it's been successful, right? I think we've managed to show that it can work.
Yeah, I think we can just refine it as we go. It's one of the things that, like, because of playtests, it kind of would benefit from like games that kind of focus on like different parts of the rules at different times. They could be like, oh, does this hold up like progression or the risk stuff? Like, find that sweet spot.
I would love to be in Jonathan's mind just to know what he thought of this. Is this kind of how he envisioned the game going? Is this the directions that he was thinking that it could go in? Did it give him any ideas? I'm really curious to know what he thought of it, being the author of this system.
He would have wanted it to be more like Robin of Sherwood, based on his Twitter post.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of us gone full circle, I guess, isn't it? Really, we're heading back into sort of getting right back to character generation, and again thinking about what our next characters might be and what the next world might be. Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up as part of this discussion, or have we come to its natural conclusion?
I don't think I've got anything to say.
Yeah.
Given time and with a little thought, I'll go, damn, why didn't I bring that? Oh, remember when this happened? Just inevitable.
Well, luckily it's an open book.
Yeah, there was a lot
never
there.
Too late.
Probably we could fill 4 sessions just with discussing all the implications of everything that was done and analyzing and everything else. But I think we did a lot of highlights of it, and so I'm very happy to have gotten that off my chest. I can now breathe and take a pause and get ready for the next game and the next campaign. And
yeah. Oh well then. So that was the game that was our very own Tales of the Infinite, a game that at some point in the future you may very well be able to put yourself on a table with through the paces of what we've come up with. We don't know where it's going, but we do know where it's come from, and that helps. We're going to find out, I guess, in the new year. We won't even have a space on the schedule for more of this until 2023, as far as I can understand. Infinite Monkey Tales has got a busy calendar up until Christmas, and if you want to be part of that, if you would like to be sitting around the table with us, either on a stream game or not on a stream game, please get in touch. Please let us know. Come and speak to us on Discord. Leave comments on our YouTubes. Hit us up on Twitter. Get in touch. Talk to us, and find a game, we'll play a game, we'll join in a game, whatever's going on.